So it's all to play for still.
I think so. Do you want to bet against us?
Hello, Aston Villa fans, and welcome to For the Love of Paul McGrath podcast. And with the clamour and I suppose the intrigue around Evann Guessand for coming to Aston Villa, I couldn't think of anybody better to have on this podcast than Alexander Barker, because Alexander works for the Athletic, but he had a really in-depth and thoughtful kind of post about said player some time ago. And the second I saw we were linked, and the second I saw this was done, I said, there's one man I need to get on this podcast. So thank you so much for your time today, Alexander. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you very much for having me on. And as that post kind of hints at, I'm just extremely excited to talk about this transfer.
Yeah, it's one that kind of caught everybody off guard. And it's funny because Villa have gone from being under, well, I won't say even under Purslow, but in maybe 5 years ago, from being one of the leakiest clubs you could find out there to being locked down and secretive. And just like a couple of years ago when Pau Torres was rumoured and signed almost in the space of 24 hours, the same thing has happened with Evann Guessand as well. So it's really kind of piqued the interest for an off-season that Villa have been pretty much dormant in and kind of defending the players that they have. But talk to us a small bit about this very versatile striker from Nice, Alexander. Talk to us, I suppose, through that post that you put up, because there's a really interesting line in it. And if anybody has never watched any of Alexander's stuff, he gives it warts and all. If he thinks a player isn't good, he will tell you a player isn't good. But there's an interesting line in this one, and it says, "I'm usually very nitpicky, but I can't find any faults with this guy."
Yeah, I'm really glad you framed that, because it is an important disclaimer. Because, one of my biggest pet peeves is, people who talk about transfers and they go, this player's perfect, this player's amazing. And in their world, it's like every player in the world is brilliant and hasn't got any flaws, and everyone's signed Cristiano Ronaldo. So I really want to reaffirm that. I've covered a lot of players this year in the same way I covered Guessand. Benjamin Sesko, for example, is moving to Manchester United, it seems, being one. Ugo Ekitike is going to Liverpool. And, I always try and be critical. And I think if you look back at what I say of those guys, I always build that as say, Ekitike, for example, this guy is very good, but he's getting quite overhyped, I would say. He's a young player, still got areas to improve. And it's not to say that Evann Guessand hasn't got areas to prove. If you read the thread, and as we'll talk about now, there are areas he definitely can improve. But what I really like about him is, and what gets me really excited, is he has such clear strengths, and the areas of weakness for me are just things that can be improved on feasibly. It's not like, to pick another name out of a hat, for example, Xavi Simons, a player I covered recently, another player I really liked. He's incredibly one-footed, and I watch him and think, well, this is always going to limit you unless you can improve on your weak foot, which is a very difficult thing to expect from a footballer at this stage. Whereas Guessand's limits, I think, are quite minor and mostly like mental, not necessarily technical. And it makes you think, wow, under a coach like Unai Emery, what sort of player can he become?
Absolutely. And I've kind of watched he was linked previously to, I won't say it was linked previously to, but Jacob Chanswell, that you may know as well from the Athletic. Jacob just happened to throw a spurious link out and say, this is a guy I would like for Aston Villa. And that was back in January or February of this year. And since then, I've been kind of watching. I watched 7 games of his in-depth, just focusing on him. And I've kind of found something similar that you mentioned there as well. But can I ask you, I suppose, realistically, this guy is somebody this is his first real full season. He had 20, I think he played 30 games this season, equated to 28 and a half, 90 minutes throughout the season. Prior to that, he was kind of eased into football. Do you have any idea maybe as to why, or what would be kind of your thoughts on that? Because I think I've got a very simple one, that some players just are allowed to come along at their own time. And he was allowed, and from watching games, I watched a game for his 2 years ago and seeing him now, and you can see the genuine progression from him. And it's just been that the player's been allowed to grow at his own speed. And sometimes that isn't allowed to happen in football. Am I being naive to think that, or is that something that you've seen yourself?
Absolutely not naive. I think that is the short answer, to put it simply. To give a bit more background, which this supports that conclusion, Guessand, I think, kind of had a bit of a Kai Havertz issue. So when he joined Nice, he joined, I think, at the under-14 level. He was actually came through as a winger, and he played with the French national team as a winger. And he's spoken about how he just shot up suddenly, had a big growth spurt, and grew to over 6 foot. I think he's about 6'2". And at that point, he got moved to striker. And so what we've seen throughout seasons prior to this is him being shifted around positionally. So he went on loan to Switzerland. I think he played more as a centre forward there. He came back to Nice, didn't play much football, went to Nantes, played off the right wing, comes back to Nice 2 seasons ago now, 23-24, and he's played kind of as a striker, sometimes off the left, sometimes off the right. And it's only really this past season where Frank Heis took over, the former Lens manager, the man basically responsible for people knowing who Lens are today at the moment, because he's the guy who revived them, playing a very structured 3-4-3 system. He moved to Nice last summer in his debut campaign. He took Evann Guessand and he's made him, played him up front still, but even when he was shifted away from that, it was to this number 10 role on the right-hand side. And it's just really suited him because he was able to move out wide and kind of do things that he might have been doing when he was a winger, like taking players on the touchline, but also was able to just bully defenders in the middle. So, yeah, the short answer is, it has taken a while for him to develop, and that is natural. I think there's quite clear progression and confidence growth in him. And the long answer is, as well, is just, I think he, just due to his background, being shifted around positionally and maybe having to change his game due to a growth spurt, is that takes time to flesh out, much in the way bringing it back to Havertz, who's, moved to the Premier League, looked a bit out of place, and is only now at Arsenal really becoming someone everyone respects as, he looks at home and comfortable in his position.
I'm delighted that you mentioned about a growth spurt, and that happens to everybody coming along at their own time. I'm 40 years of age. I'm still waiting for my growth spurt. Fingers crossed. If everybody could, light a candle for me, that would be fantastic, because I would give anything to be over 6 foot, but I'm only a small guy.
Same, don't worry.
But yeah, no, listen, that's a really, really a really good bit of context that you've given us there, specifically about the manager as well, about Frank Heis coming in there, because he did do wonders with Lens, and he's, I won't say he's a similar type of kind of, I sometimes refer to Unai Emery as a megalomaniac, and the fact that he's very, very detailed, he's super intense and in your face and professorial. Frank Heis can kind of be like that, but from more a tactical point of view. So I like that kind of juxtaposition potentially that he would have coming from there. He would have been in the detail, and the reason I bring that up is because I watched the game that they played against Marseille in the year just gone, and it almost kind of solidifies my thought process from that game, because I thought that they very much had a game plan that day for Evann Guessand to target certain areas, certain parts, certain people within that team, and he did, and he ended up getting a goal and an assist, and he was bloody brilliant. I thought that day he was really good. He was economical with his play, and it looked like he basically did what he was told. So I love that. I love the fact that you brought that in, that a manager thinking, a player's manager from the point of view of he'll tactically get the best out of you, came in, got the best out of this guy, gave him his wonder season, and he's now coming to a manager who's pretty famous for doing that as well. So that does spell good news, I think, for the fit and the marriage between these two people. So talk me through, you've touched on a couple of things that Evann Guessand is good at, but what would be his main strengths? And you mentioned these strengths are very strong. What would those strengths be to you?
I think I was just looking back at this before I came on, and there is a lot of strengths, I think, across his game. But the one that really stood out, and I mentioned it in the thread as well, is for people unaware, when I scout players, I follow what's typically the traditional way of doing it, described by the FA, which is you look at 4 areas of a player. They're what they're doing tactically, so what they're being asked to do, technically, like how well they hit the ball, for example, right? Like passing, shooting, dribbling, for example, physicality, and like the psychological element, like their thinking, right? And Guessand is one of the very few players I've covered this year who just, in the physical section, I just didn't have anything negative to say whatsoever. I think I think he's like one of the most impressive, well-rounded physical players in Europe. So like on the one hand, he's very quick. He's obviously not like a rapid Aaron Lennon player, but he's still someone who is capable of knocking the ball past a defender and just overtaking them through sheer pace, which is like such a useful thing to have. It's someone who's definitely a threat running in behind, but he's also really strong with his back to goal too. Just like a very muscular player who can hold players off well. So it's almost like you get two sort of forwards in one. And like on top of that, as well as being like quite tall, pretty strong and quick, like, there's just this ridiculous agility to his game. And you know, I thought when I'd look back at him, it was a while since I covered him, and I thought Villa having like made an attempt to sign him, looks like they're going to get him. I thought I'd look back at his footage and think, oh, maybe I was being, you know, a bit too over the top, got a bit excited. I was just watching him now, and I was actually more impressed with just how agile he is as a footballer. Like he's much more agile than a lot of players I've been watching recently. Just like is able to do almost two movements while the defender is only able to do one. So I think the biggest strength, to sum it up, is everything about him as an athlete. He's powerful, like agile and quick. I just don't think you could ask for anything more in a footballer.
And they're very important. Villa do lack pace. They really lack pace in this team. And I think having those intangibles that you mentioned there, things that you can't grow in a player as such. You can't force feed a guy to become 6'1". You can't make a guy, well, you can make a guy extra pliable or bendy and stuff like that, but it's going to take you a bloody long period of time. And, you know, it's not always guaranteed that it's not going to take away from the rest of his game. But what you mentioned there is really interesting as well, because from my watching of him, specifically when he plays off the wing, because when we say he plays off the wing, he's that inverted forward. He's kind of like kind of in the mold of kind of a Mo Salah, except you know he's not going to be that person who's going to come so deep to carry the ball forward like Salah does. But what I love about him is 6'1", big guy. Don't miss him on the field. He's all there. But it's like if sometimes defenders can't hear him running, kind of like Thierry. And again, not being hyperbolic, I mentioned this on my scouting piece I did in him. Kind of like Thierry Henry. He's like if he's wearing slippers on the field. You know, he gets in behind defenders, and defenders suddenly go, "This guy's behind me, or this guy's after coming across me. Where the hell's he after coming from?" You know, like he's got that kind of ghost capability as well to go along with the athleticism, but it does jump off the field. You know, you do see it, and also his technique as well, the way he's able to strike the ball. You mentioned that about that as well. How did you find that kind of manifested itself within his game, his technique and his striking of the ball? 2-footed, 1-footed. What way did you see that?
Yeah, I found it quite unorthodox in a sense, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think when you look at him as a right-footed player who has history of a winger, you immediately assume, okay, this guy plays at left wing, cutting inside, shooting. But that's not something he really excels at, because in terms of like finishing or shooting, like one area of his game where he does need to improve on is long-range finishing. I think he only has one goal in his career from outside of the box. And a big part of the reason behind that is because he just struggles to like generate a lot of curl on his shots. Most of them are at a cross goal, be it on his right or left foot. He's capable of using his left foot. I think that's also down to the fact he relies a lot on power as well. There's not much placement in his shots, at least from distance. So how that manifests itself, it means if Guessand's cutting in from the left, you might get him into a nice position when you think, oh, you could bend that in the top corner. You've got this. And it's not really what he does well. He actually much prefers to be, I'd say, off the right, driving towards goal and then striking into the bottom corner using the inside of his foot, like almost passing it in, if it makes sense, or banging it with his laces as hard as he can. And he's got a bit more of a goal to aim at there. So he's a bit unorthodox in that sense, but like the two reasons why I don't think it's too much of a problem. If let's say this is what he is as a finisher and it never improves. First thing I would say is that his movement is excellent. He consistently gets into goal scoring opportunities. So even if he doesn't always finish them, the volume he'll just keep getting from his runs means he should still continue to score goals. But the other thing I would say as well is actually kind of what you hinted at. I really appreciate him just getting shots off in generally most scenarios. So something I've mentioned before about him, he's someone who really anticipates volleys well and makes like a nice connection on both right and left foot. So that's someone, if the ball's going behind him, you can still trust him to get maybe a shot on target in that regard. If he's forced onto his left foot, definitely not afraid to use it. You can generally get a lot of power on that as well. Maybe the accuracy won't be there, but hey, there's a lot of strikers who will just force the ball into their right foot. So, and the game you mentioned actually earlier against Marseille, I think that was in January. The only reason I know this like a psychopath is because I watched every Marseille game from the past season, over the past month, actually. I remember that game because he dominates Lily and Brassier, I think. And that's like one of Brassier's final games for Marseille. Poor him. Anyway, Guessand in that game just runs through, chips the keeper effortlessly. And that's just another finishing trait he has in his bag. So despite him like struggling, I'd say cutting inside from the left, shooting on his right, there's a lot of areas he can score goals, a lot of ways he can still score goals. So I'd say overall, even though it's a bit unorthodox, it's a positive.
Yeah, exactly. Look, there's been plenty of centre forward. It's been unorthodox that's made it work in the Premier League. Just last night when I was doing a show on him, one of the guys commented about Emmanuel Adebayor, and I think he could be classified as being unorthodox and a bit clunky, but he made it work in the Premier League and wherever he went. So, this guy obviously isn't clunky; he's a lot more fluid, as we mentioned that time as well. But that's a really, really great observation, specifically about the two-footedness and about the volleys and so on. Now, you mentioned that there are some areas. Obviously, every player has an area of improvement. You mentioned that there were areas of mental improvement. Do you want to elaborate on that maybe a small little bit so that the guys get a better feel for that?
Yeah, of course. So I think I'd previously separated this into two things, and I actually think it's just one thing. I think Guessand can be a bit of a slow decision maker, and this shows, I'd say, in two ways. I'd say it shows in his dribbling. Guessand has like a decent dribble success rate. I think last time I checked, it's like around 48%. Yeah. But I think he's like true dribble success rate. Because when you say that, you think, oh, he's getting tackled a lot because he can't beat a man. I think his true dribble success rate is like way, way, way higher. It's not to do with skill, the reason he gets tackled. It's much more due to him, I'd say, beating one man, beating two man, and thinking, cool, I've got this. Like I can score like Maradona did in 1986, and just keep running and running, and he runs into traffic and loses the ball. Obviously, I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but like I think that's how it manifests himself, where he might beat one or two men. He's got his head down. He just needs to look up and make that pass, and he is capable of doing that. Like something we mentioned as a side note, right? He's a very creative player. He got a lot of assists last season. He's got very good vision. There's a reason he got moved to that 10 role as well as a striker role last season at Nice. But yeah, if he needs to get his head up more, I'd say on the ball. And I'd say as well, when he's in the box, maybe another reason why like he's finishing, sometimes he could score more goals, is the fact that I just think he takes too many touches before shooting. He might get into the box, might have half a yard to shoot, just takes that extra touch because he wants a bit more space to shoot. And it's a mistake because that gives time for the defenders to catch up. So I think it's all about the speed of decision making and just getting better, like almost getting better at knowing what you're going to do before you're going to do it. Instead of, I feel like in the box, you can kind of be a bit like, okay, I've taken this touch, what can I do now? I'll take another. Whereas he just needs to get maybe a bit better of, defender's going to be here, I'm going to take a touch and bang, not even think about it, shoot. Just that pre-planning sort of thing.
So I suppose every Aston Villa fan, you've mentioned a small bit about him, maybe playing from the left, cutting in off the right, maybe not his most favourite position. Obviously, right, cutting in from that inside. Somewhere he's played a lot more, played up top a small bit more as well. I think the splits are something like 46% of the games he's ever played have been as a striker, and then the rest have been, so whatever, the 54% have been in those three areas behind. Villa are crying out for number 10 because I think all Villa fans want to see Daniel Mallon on the right. They want to see Morgan Rogers on the left. Well, actually, I'll put it this way. They don't want to see Morgan Rogers on the right. Anywhere else but the right there, because he's so much more effective down the middle or on that left-hand side. Do you think it could be a case that you could have Rogers left, Guessand through the centre and Daniel Mallon on the right? Or do you think that that would probably not be using him to his best ability?
No, I actually think that's a nice setup for it, particularly in the way Villa play. I haven't watched a preseason game, so please correct me if Emery's changing his system. But that Villa's system has usually worked, right, with Rogers off the left coming inside as being more like, you tend to create more of a box formation, right, with two attacking midfielders, not just the one on paper. So I think in this setup, Rogers coming inside is inevitably going to push Guessand a bit to the right. Which is where he kind of plays in Nice anyway. And like something to consider when you're doing recruitment is it's not just about picking up a player and plugging him into your team, expecting him to thrive immediately. There's a lot of like subtle things that player is going to have to adjust to. If it's a different system, for example, that can completely throw a player off. Something I quite like about this little position for Villa is with Marlon being the sort of speed demon on the right and someone who's going to be hugging the touchline more or less and coming inside later on. But let's be honest, he's going to be more of a winger. That kind of represents a bit of a similar setup, I'd say, to Nice, last season in a weird way, where they play a back three because Guessand as that number 10 had Jonathan Klaus on the right, very attacking wing back, racing down the line, much in the same way Marlon probably would do as well. So what I'm saying is, in this position you're describing at Villa, he's going to have that reference point as a striker in front of him, like he did at Nice. He's going to have a reference point as someone overlapping him on the right in Marlon, and like Klaus did at Nice. And yeah, he'll have Rogers coming in as a 10 beside him, again, like he had at Nice. So quite like this position. I actually think it makes a lot of sense.
Brilliant. I was hoping you would say that. I was hoping you would say that because it's not something I've given much thought to. A lot of the reason I think Emery has made this signing is obviously we've got SCR, PSR, hamstrings that are catching us every time. His positional versatility, and for the 22 million up front that we're apparently paying for him, I just think that that's probably worth more than when people might look at it and say, oh, what's his goals and assists return? Yeah, they're good, but his versatility is probably what made Unai Emery smile a bit more when the ink was dry at the edge on the contract, which we hope he signed in the last 24 hours for sure. But listen, Alexander, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really, really appreciate it. You've given some brilliant context to it. If anybody isn't aware of Alexander, well, I don't really know what you're doing if you follow football or if you scout players or if you're looking at for information on players, because he does a really, really great job. He did a really great job prior to the Athletic. I've followed him for probably about 6-7 years now, and since he's gone to the Athletic, it's elevated. He's elevated their coverage and he's elevated his own coverage himself as well. So really appreciate everything you do, Alexander. Keep up the great work, and thanks a million for your time.
Oh, thank you very much. And it was a pleasure to be back. It's a pleasure to be on. Like, I want to be more on Aston Villa channels next season. So hopefully it's not last time you see me.
Excellent. You're welcome anytime. So thanks very much, everybody, for watching and for listening. I hope you really enjoyed that. Go follow Alexander if you're not following him already. And we will be back as soon as any more news comes out about Aston Villa Football Club. As you know, we don't even sleep now because we've got Villa AM. We'll be here as well every single morning. If you're not catching Villa AM, it's an 8-minute roundup of the news before. There's no fluff. There's nothing. It's just a newsreel. And some people prefer that. So if that is your bag, go and listen to that as well. But thanks so much, everybody, for watching and for listening. Thanks a million to Alexander for his time today. In the meantime, everybody, stay safe, stay healthy. And all that's left to say is up the Villa.